The sea was calm that morning, deceptively calm, as if it knew that before the sunset, thousands of men would meet their fate beneath its surface. April 7, 1945. The Yamato, pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy and the largest battleship ever built, prepared for her final voyage. She stood in the bay like a floating mountain of steel, her massive guns pointing toward the horizon, where the end already waited. The crew called her the last sword of the Empire. To others, she was already a ghost. On deck, sailors worked in silence. Some smoked, some laughed too loudly, the way men do when they're afraid but won't admit it. Orders came down, no return, no escort beyond the destroyers. A one-way mission to reach Okinawa, beach the ship, and die fighting like samurai. The young captain, Kosaku Origa, walked the deck slowly, his uniform pressed, his eyes distant. He knew every man aboard looked to him not for hope, but for courage. And he would not fail them. As dawn broke, Yamato's engines roared to life. The harbor shuddered as her massive propellers tore through the water, sending white foam cascading behind her. Villagers along the shore watched in silence, bowing deeply as she passed. No cheers, no music, only tears and the sound of the waves. They all knew they would never see her again. By midday, the sea was endless. The air thick with salt and fate. The radio crackled with reports of enemy planes, hundreds of them. Origa raised his head toward the sky. "So this is how it ends," he said softly. "Not by the sword, but by the storm from above." The first bombs fell an hour later. American dive bombers screamed from the clouds like metal hawks. The ship shook violently as explosions tore into her decks. Fire erupted, smoke rising in black columns visible for miles. Yet Yamato fought back, her anti-aircraft guns roared like thunder, filling the sky with walls of steel. Dozens of planes fell burning into the sea, but there were too many. A torpedo slammed into her side, then another. The ship listed, groaned, and her engine screamed as she tried to right herself. Men ran through corridors of fire, shouting prayers and orders that vanished in the roar of battle. Origa stayed on the bridge, refusing to abandon his post. "We are the last breath of the Empire," he said, gripping the railing. "We will not sink in silence." At 2:23 p.m., the ocean exploded. A final wave of bombs hit the magazine deep inside the ship. A single blinding flash tore through the sky, and the Yamato, the mightiest battleship ever built, was gone. The blast was seen 120 miles away. Where she had stood, there was only a column of smoke reaching toward heaven, and a rain of twisted steel falling into the sea. Of 3,300 men, only 276 survived. The rest, sailors, engineers, officers, dreamers, went down with their ship. The sea closed over them quietly, as if sealing a promise. That evening, the waves were calm again. The sun set red on the horizon, and the wind whispered through the wreckage. Somewhere deep below, the Yamato rested at last, not as a weapon, but as a monument. A monument to devotion, to sacrifice, to the end of an era when honor weighed more than survival. And so ended the last voyage of the Yamato, the ship that sailed not to win, but to die beautifully. As night fell over the East China Sea, the survivors clung to pieces of wreckage, their faces illuminated by the distant glow of burning oil. The ocean was quiet now, too quiet as if it mourned what it had just consumed. The smell of smoke and salt hung heavy in the air, and the cries of men slowly faded into the rhythm of the waves. Those who remained alive looked around in disbelief. Just hours ago, they had stood aboard a fortress of steel and pride, the mightiest creation of their nation. Now, all that remained were drifting shadows and shattered memories. Far below, the Yamato sank into darkness, her massive guns still aimed toward the horizon. Inside her hull, corridors once filled with shouts and footsteps were now silent, filled only with the groan of bending metal. The great ship had become a tomb for admirals, for sailors, for an empire's dream. In Tokyo, the radio spoke of a glorious sacrifice. The truth was quieter. Sadder, a generation's faith buried beneath the waves. The emperor never mentioned her name again. But among the fishermen who sailed those waters, stories began to spread. They said that on calm nights, when the sea was glassy and the moon bright, you could still hear the faint echo of engines beneath the surface. Some swore they saw the outline of her deck shimmering in the depths, as if the Yamato was still sailing not toward war, but toward peace she never found. Years passed. The ocean took everything: steel, souls, secrets. But it could not erase what she symbolized. The Yamato was not just a ship. She was a nation's pride, its tragedy, its final bow before the curtain fell. In 1985, divers finally reached her resting place 1,200 feet below. They found the bow broken, the bridge shattered, the guns still silent. Yet something in that silence felt alive. The divers said it felt like being watched, not with anger, but with dignity. As if the ship itself remembered every name, every heartbeat that once echoed within her. And even now, as modern ships pass over her grave, captains still lower their flags. Not in fear, not in victory, but in respect. Because deep below them sleeps a giant, the last samurai of the sea. The Yamato, whose final voyage was not about conquest, but remembrance. She was built to rule the oceans, but in the end, she ruled something greater, the memory of what it means to fight for everything, and lose it with honor. The sea still keeps her secret, but when the storms rise and thunder rolls across the horizon, sailors say they can hear it, the deep echo of her guns, roaring once more beneath the waves. A reminder that legends never die. They simply rest in the deep. The dawn that followed was painted in great, cold, distant, and silent. The East China Sea lay still, as if exhausted by what it had witnessed. For miles, only drifting debris remained, torn life jackets, scorched wood, and twisted pieces of steel that once formed the pride of an empire. A single sailor, clinging to a floating beam, stared at the horizon. His eyes were red from salt and smoke, but behind them burned something that wouldn't die, the image of the Yamato, proud and immense, cutting through the waves one last time. He remembered her sound, the deep, rhythmic thunder of the engines that made the ocean tremble. He remembered the camaraderie, the laughter before the silence, the way every man aboard knew the truth yet carried it with honor. They weren't sailing to win. They were sailing to end with dignity. To show the world that even in defeat, there was something unbreakable in the human spirit. Rescue ships arrived hours later. The men who pulled the survivors from the wreckage didn't speak. They saw it in their faces, what words could not express. The look of men who had seen their gods fall. Some wept. Some smiled faintly, whispering their ship's name like a prayer, Yamato. As the years passed, Japan changed. The empire was gone, the war ended, the cities rebuilt. But deep in the hearts of those who knew her story, the Yamato remained. Not as a weapon, not as a relic of destruction, but as a symbol of everything that was lost and everything that endured. Fishermen still talk about her. When the sea turns calm and the wind dies, they say the water becomes heavy, as if something massive stirs beneath it. And sometimes, at sunset, the reflection of the sky looks red, not from the sun, but from the fire that took her. The old sailors nod quietly and whisper, "She's still there." Watching. In museums, her model stands proud and silent, its guns pointed toward eternity. Children press their faces to the glass, fascinated by the sheer size of her, not knowing that she was more than metal, she was sacrifice shaped into steel. And somewhere, far beneath the waves, the Yamato rests peacefully, her flag still folded in her heart. She will never rise again. She doesn't need to. Her story sails without her, carried by every tide, whispered by every wave. For when the world forgets the meaning of honor, the sea will remind them with a distant echo from the deep. The voice of a ship that refused to surrender. The last giant. The Yamato. Beneath the endless weight of the East China Sea, the Yamato sleeps undisturbed, her hull draped in darkness and coral. Time has softened her edges, but not her presence. The ocean moves around her gently, as though afraid to wake her, as though it too understands that what rests here is more than wreckage, it is a soul, forged in pride and ended in fire. Tiny fish drift through her shattered corridors where men once shouted orders and prayed in the same breath. Her great guns, once the voice of thunder, now lie silent, pointing eternally toward the surface as if still waiting for one last command that will never come. Sometimes, when storms roll across the Pacific and the sea begins to rage, sailors say they can hear her stir. The water trembles, the wind howls, and for a fleeting second, it feels as though the Yamato rises again, proud, defiant, unbroken. Lightning flashes across the horizon, illuminating the phantom of a ship that refuses to fade. The storm always passes, but the feeling lingers, a presence, a heartbeat buried in the deep. Decades later, when divers descend to her resting place, they do not speak. Even through the static of their radios, there's silence, a deep, heavy quiet that feels sacred. Cameras capture her form, the great bow, the twisted decks, the remnants of her bridge, and yet, every image fails to capture what it feels like to be there. To stand in the shadow of something that once carried the weight of a nation's hope, now kept alive only by the sea's eternal memory. Back on the surface, the world has changed beyond recognition. Nations that were once enemies now sail side by side. Yet whenever a Japanese ship passes over her coordinates, tradition remains. The engines slow. The crew gathers on deck. And for 1 minute, they stand in silence. No words. No orders. Only the soft hum of the ocean below. Then a bell rings once deep, hollow, final. A salute not to war, but to sacrifice. Because some ships are never forgotten. They do not rest as wrecks, they rest as warnings. The Yamato reminds the world that even the greatest power built by human hands cannot stand against the tide forever. And yet, in her fall, she achieved something no victory ever could: immortality. The waves still break softly over the place where she sank. And when the sun sets over the East China Sea, the horizon burns gold and red, the same colors that once lit her final battle. In that light, it almost seems as though she sails again, steady and proud, carving her path through eternity. Her name whispered by the sea itself. Yamato. The wind grew still over the East China Sea as the last light of day sank beneath the horizon. The waves, calm and endless, moved like a slow heartbeat above the place where the Yamato slept. No sound, no movement, only silence, deep and eternal. But in that silence, there was meaning. The kind of silence that follows great things, not defeat, not loss, but remembrance. Far below, her guns remained aimed toward the sky, rusted but unyielding. Her deck, once alive with voices and fire, now lay covered in coral and sand. Yet every bolt, every twisted plate, still held the weight of thousands of hearts that refused to yield. The ocean had taken her body, but not her soul. Above her grave, the sea whispered softly, carrying her story across the waves, a story of duty, courage, and sacrifice. Not of victory, but of dignity. Not of destruction, but of devotion. The Yamato had gone down not as a weapon, but as a symbol of men who faced the impossible and still chose to sail. In the end, time will wash away all things, ships, nations, even empires. But not legends. Legends sink deeper than the sea, where neither rust nor silence can touch them. And so, when the night falls and the stars reflect on the dark water, the ocean still remembers. Somewhere in the deep, a shadow moves. A faint echo of engines hums through the current. The Yamato sails once more, not in battle, but in eternity.